The thing that stalked us in Shasta Forest. The weekend escape. Evan, Laurie, and Mark wanted a break from city noise, so they packed their tent and hiked into Shasta Trinity National Forest. The air was crisp, the pine needles soft under their boots. The world felt peaceful, until night fell. Their fire crackled beneath towering pines, shadows twisting across the tents. Laurie laughed, tossing another log in. Feels like we're miles from anyone. They didn't know how right she was. Around midnight, Mark thought he saw a flashlight moving between the trees. No beam, just the faint reflection like someone watching. Evan called out, thinking it was another camper, but no one answered. By morning, they found bare footprints pressed in the mud behind their tent, human-sized but wrong somehow. The toes looked longer, curling into the dirt like claws. That's when the forest stopped feeling peaceful. The whistling. That night, after hiking deeper into the woods, they built another campfire near a moss-covered boulder. Around 2 a.m., Laurie shook Evan awake. "Do you hear that?" There was a faint whistling, slow, tuneless, almost playful. It echoed from somewhere far off, then closer, then far again. Mark shined his flashlight into the dark, the beam shaking in his hand. Maybe it's wind through the trees. But the sound changed. It began mimicking Laurie's laugh from earlier, repeating it over and over like a recording. The forest went still. Even the insects stopped. Evan whispered, "Pack your stuff, now." When he turned off the light, they could see it, a silhouette crouched behind the boulder, too thin, too tall to be human. And it was rocking, side to side, like it was waiting. The missing footage. They ran until dawn and reached a ranger outpost near the trailhead. The ranger, an older man named Holt, frowned as they explained. "You shouldn't camp past Bunny Flat," he said quietly. "There have been reports." Mark showed him footage from his GoPro, but the clip froze halfway through. When he replayed it, the last frame showed a pale hand gripping the side of his tent, long fingers with cracked nails. That night, in the motel where they stayed, Laurie heard the same whistling again, faint but unmistakable, coming from the vent above the bathroom mirror. Evan climbed onto the counter to check it, shining his phone light inside. There was nothing there. But when he climbed down, the mirror had a handprint on it, smeared, wet, with streaks of black soil. The return to the woods. Against better judgment, Evan and Mark returned to the site the next day. Laurie refused to go. They followed the GPS pin from Mark's GoPro, ending up back near that moss-covered boulder. Everything was still, until they found a half-buried tent torn open. Inside were camping supplies, a child's shoe, and an old camera. Evan played the footage. The last scene showed a man whispering, "It's watching me," before turning the camera toward the trees. Between the trunks stood the same tall silhouette, swaying like before, whistling the same slow tune. Evan dropped the camera, trembling. Mark muttered, "It's not human." Then, somewhere in the forest, the whistling started again, closer than before. The face in the light. They bolted toward their truck, the forest seeming to twist around them. Evan's flashlight flickered. Every time it did, he saw glimpses of something keeping pace beside them in the trees. At the clearing, Mark screamed. The beam caught a face reflected in the window of the truck, pale, mouth stretched too wide, black eyes glinting. When Evan turned, no one was there. They jumped inside, locking the doors. The whistling began again, this time right behind the vehicle. Evan floored the gas, spinning gravel as they tore down the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, something long-limbed and grey stepped out from behind the trees. It lifted its head slowly and smiled. The final recording. Back in the city, Evan uploaded Mark's footage to his laptop, trying to find any proof. Halfway through the final clip, he froze. Behind them, during their escape, a figure was running alongside the truck, crawling on all fours at full speed. Laurie never spoke about it again. Mark moved states away. Evan, however, returned to Shasta a year later. He told friends he needed closure. 2 weeks later, his car was found near the same forest road. Inside, the keys were still in the ignition, but the driver's seat was empty. The only clue was his phone. The screen cracked, still recording. In the distance, faintly, a voice could be heard. "Whistle back." The screams by Crystal Lake. The arrival at Crystal Lake. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend away. Tara, Kyle, and Mason arrived at Crystal Lake Campground, a quiet site miles from any main road. The air smelled of pine and smoke, the lake surface glassy under the early evening sun. They pitched their tent near a fallen birch tree, laughter echoing across the still water. A local ranger, an older man in a green jacket, passed by and warned them gently, "Don't wander near the east shore after dark. Locals say the lake remembers things." They laughed it off, roasted marshmallows, and watched fireflies flicker in the dusk. By midnight, mist crept across the lake like breath on glass. Just before they turned in, Mason pointed at the far shore. A dim lantern light flickered once, then vanished. They thought they were alone. The distant cry around 2 a.m., Tara woke to a faint screaming sound echoing over the lake, distant, sharp, and human. She shook Kyle awake. "Did you hear that?" Kyle unzipped the tent, scanning the foggy lake with his flashlight. Nothing, just white mist and the soft lapping of water. Then came another scream, closer this time, echoing off the trees. "Someone's hurt," Mason whispered, grabbing his coat. They followed the sound down the trail leading toward the eastern shore. The fog was thick as smoke now, and the air smelled of iron. They found a single red jacket snagged on a low branch, wet, cold and torn. Mason called out, but the scream came again, this time from behind them, where their campsite was. The footprints in the sand. They ran back toward camp, breath steaming in the cold. But when they reached the lakeside clearing, their fire had gone out. Tara pointed to the shoreline. "Those weren't here before." There were bare footprints in the wet sand, large, deep, circling their tent. No one spoke. Kyle tried to relight the fire, his hands shaking. The match went out twice. Then Mason froze, staring toward the water. Something was standing waist-deep in the lake, motionless, pale, like a person staring straight at them. "Hello?" Kyle called. The figure didn't move. When Tara shined her flashlight, it revealed a woman's face, water dripping from her hair. But her eyes were white, her mouth slightly open. And then she stepped backward into the water and disappeared. The journal. They packed their bags before sunrise, but Mason couldn't leave without checking the ranger's station. Inside it was empty, the radio crackling static. On the desk lay a water-stained journal labeled Incident Report 1979. Inside were entries about missing campers, all last seen at Crystal Lake's east shore. The last note read, "They always hear her first." Mason's flashlight flickered as a wet sound echoed from the corner of the cabin. He turned. A puddle of water spread slowly across the wooden floor, leading to the open door. Outside faintly came that same scream again, muffled like it was underwater. He backed away, breath shaking. Something brushed against the window, 5 long, dripping fingers dragging down the glass. The thing in the tent. That night, they stayed in their truck, parked near the ranger trail. Rain pounded the roof as wind whipped through the trees. Around 3 a.m., they heard movement outside, slow footsteps squishing in the mud. Tara whispered, "Stay quiet." The tent they'd left behind rustled violently, as if someone was crawling inside. Then came that same wet, gurgling sound, like someone breathing through water. Kyle turned on the headlights. For a second, they saw her. The same drenched woman standing in front of the tent, her head tilted unnaturally sideways. Her mouth opened wider than humanly possible. The scream that came out shattered the night, not through air but inside their heads. The lake takes what it wants. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Mason was gone. His side of the truck door was wide open, footprints leading back toward the lake. Tara and Kyle followed them in silence until they reached the eastern shore. There at the water's edge lay Mason's jacket, soaked and heavy. His phone rested beside it, screen cracked, still recording. The last 10 seconds of the video showed Mason walking into the fog, whispering, "It's her. She's calling me." Then came a faint splash and nothing. Later that week, police divers searched the lake. They found no body, just a red jacket tangled deep in the reeds. To this day, locals say on foggy nights, if you camp near the east shore of Crystal Lake, you can still hear her scream. The man behind the tree line, the forest that never sleeps. Lena loved camping, but the Redwood National Forest had a strange energy. The trees were massive, silent, almost ancient. She and her boyfriend Josh, along with her brother Ethan, parked their RV near a trail that hadn't been used in years. They laughed as they set up a fire pit, the flames painting orange shadows across the giant trunks. A park ranger stopped by before dusk. "Don't go past the old fence line," he said. "There's a reason the park closed that section." They nodded politely, though Ethan joked, "What, Bigfoot lives there?" That night, as the fire died and cicadas sang, Lena noticed something odd. Between the trees in the far darkness, a man-shaped shadow stood still, too still. She blinked and it was gone, but the next morning, fresh boot prints circled their campsite, large, deep, hand leading toward the fence line, the whistle in the woods. Later that afternoon, they hiked a nearby stream. The air smelled of moss and cold iron, and the wind barely moved through the trees. Ethan wandered off to take photos when a low whistle echoed between the trunks, 3 short notes like a signal. Josh shouted, "Ethan, knock it off!" But Ethan's voice came from the opposite direction. "I thought that was you." They froze. Lena felt the hairs on her neck rise. Between 2 trees, she saw a glimpse of movement. A man in a dirty brown jacket, half hidden behind a redwood, just watching. His face was obscured by shadow, but his stance was unnatural, the stiff, slightly tilted. They ran back to camp before sunset. That night they could hear faint whistling again, same pattern, same rhythm, but closer this time, and something brushed the RV window. The fence line, Ethan insisted on checking it out in daylight. Against Lena's protests, they hiked toward the old fence line the ranger warned about. Rusted barbed wire sagged between posts, almost swallowed by the forest. They found a small clearing, filled with broken beer bottles, torn tarps, and what looked like the remnants of a makeshift camp. Lena found an old flashlight still crusted with mud. Suddenly, Josh said, "Someone's living here." Then came that whistle again, louder this time, just beyond the clearing. 3 short notes, pause, 3 more from another direction. The forest seemed alive with whispers and movement. Something snapped behind them, heavy footsteps crunching pine needles. Lena turned, expecting Ethan. But what she saw made her blood run cold. A tall man, smiling too wide, his jacket torn, his eyes reflecting light like an animal's. He took a step forward. The buried camp. They ran, crashing through brush until they found an abandoned ranger cabin, its roof half collapsed, hidden deep in the woods. Inside, the air smelled of rot and old smoke. On a wooden table were old missing persons flyers, all hikers, all last seen near the same fence line. Ethan whispered, "He's been here a long time." As the sun set, the forest dimmed to black. A sound came from outside, slow scraping against the walls. Then that same whistle, but this time it was right at the door. The knob rattled. Lena clutched a rusted axe handle, heart pounding. Through the crack of the door, a pale hand pressed against the wood. Long fingers, dirt under the nails. When she swung the axe, the hand withdrew. Silence fell until a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." The chase through the trees. They fled the cabin at dawn, following the faint sound of rushing water, hoping it led back toward camp. The forest was cold, breath visible in the air. Every few minutes they'd hear snapping branches, faint footsteps keeping pace with them. Then, through the mist, the same brown jacket appeared between the trees, just standing, staring. Josh threw a rock toward him. It hit, but the man didn't react, just tilted his head and began walking forward. Fast, too fast, they sprinted toward the stream, tripping through mud and roots. The whistling started again, louder, frantic, echoing from every direction. When they reached their RV, the door was open. Someone had been inside. On the seat was a single Polaroid photo, their campfire from last night, taken from behind the trees. The forgotten trail. They left the forest without looking back. The sheriff later told them no ranger had been assigned to that section of the park for years. It was decommissioned after a series of disappearances in the 1980s. When Lena showed him the Polaroid, his face went pale. "That man's name was Clyde Warren," he said. "A survivalist. He went missing in 1982. They never found him." 2 weeks later, Lena received a package with no return address. Inside was a dirty Polaroid, this time showing her front porch. She stared at it, frozen, and faintly outside her window, someone whistled 3 short notes, the same tune from Redwood Forest. The Hollow Creek incident, the perfect getaway. Ryan wanted peace after losing his father. He booked Hollow Creek Campgrounds, a once popular riverside retreat that had recently reopened after decades. The site looked old, 3 wooden cabins, moss creeping up their sides. The sign faded to almost nothing. Emily joked, "Looks like a horror movie set." They unpacked as the sun dipped low, golden light slicing through the trees. The only sound was the slow rush of the nearby creek. It was peaceful, until Ryan noticed something strange. There were footprints in the mud, fresh ones leading from cabin 3 to the water's edge. But they hadn't seen anyone else around since they arrived. That night, as they roasted marshmallows, Emily pointed toward the tree line. Someone was watching them, a tall figure in a yellow raincoat, half hidden in the fog. When Ryan stood up to call out, it was gone. The screams from cabin 3. The next morning, Ryan decided to check cabin 3. The door hung crooked, half rotted. Inside, dust and old furniture covered in cobwebs, but something caught his eye. A stack of Polaroids, each showing campers sitting around a fire. With that same yellow raincoat figure in the background, he showed Emily, who laughed nervously. Probably just a prank. That night, rain poured. The wind made the trees moan and thunder cracked over the hills. Then came a scream, sharp, human, from the direction of cabin 3. Tom grabbed a flashlight, but when they reached it, the door was wide open, the floor soaked in muddy footprints, and from the darkness inside came the faint sound of gurgling, like someone trying to breathe underwater. Ryan stepped closer, and a muddy handprint appeared on the window beside him from the inside. Something in the creek. They packed up at sunrise. Ryan said, "We're leaving." But their truck wouldn't start, battery drained, wires chewed. Emily went to refill water from the creek nearby. Minutes later, she screamed. When Ryan ran over, she was staring into the shallow water. Beneath the surface was a submerged tent, half buried in silt. He saw flashes of a flashlight, a shoe, and something else, a hand, still clutching a camera. They ran back to camp and contacted the local ranger station via emergency radio. Static. Only a faint, distorted voice replied, "Don't go near the water." That night, they tried to stay awake inside the cabin. Around 3 a.m., Ryan heard splashing, slow, rhythmic steps in the creek. When he peeked outside, the man in the yellow raincoat stood knee-deep in water, head tilted, staring directly toward their window. The ranger's warning, morning brought no safety. A park ranger truck pulled up suddenly. The ranger, a man in his 50s with deep lines on his face, looked panicked. He told them the EDC campground had been closed for 40 years. After a family drowned in the flood of 1974, people still report seeing someone walking near the creek, he said quietly. "They call him the Watcher," Tom scoffed. "Ghost stories." The ranger handed Ryan a soggy Polaroid he found near the water, their group from last night's fire taken from behind the trees. Ryan froze. "How did you—" But when they looked up, the ranger's truck was already rolling down the road, and the driver's seat was empty. They stood there, listening. The sound of splashing returned, 3 distinct footsteps. Pause, then again closer. The floodlight. Desperate, Ryan rigged a floodlight from the truck battery, pointing it toward the creek. The night was thick with fog, the forest eerily still. Then the light flickered. From the mist, the yellow raincoat emerged again. This time closer, dripping wet water cascading from the sleeves. The man's head was bent forward, his face hidden beneath the hood. "Stay back," Ryan yelled, holding a flare. The man raised a hand, and water poured from his sleeve as if his veins carried the river itself. The air turned cold, heavy. Emily whispered, trembling, "Ryan, he's not walking. He's floating." Then the floodlight blew out. The world went black except for the soft, wet sound of footsteps circling the cabin. And a voice, barely audible over the rain. "You shouldn't have come back to Hollow Creek, the creek that remembers." At dawn, a rescue team found only 2 sets of belongings. Ryan's truck empty. Emily's phone smashed beside the creek. Tom was found a mile downstream, shivering, unable to speak, repeating one phrase. The man in the coat was under the water. Weeks later, investigators drained part of Hollow Creek and discovered a rusted raincoat caught on a tree root. Inside its pocket, old Polaroids, hundreds of them spanning decades. Each one showed different campers, different years. All watched from the same angle, and in the latest photo, dated just 2 days before the incident, stood Ryan, Emily, and Tom. Behind them, the shadow of a man in yellow just starting to step from the creek. The whistling in Red Pine Forest. Arrival at Red Pine. Lena and her friends David and Kyle planned a weekend escape into Red Pine National Forest, known for its untouched beauty and eerie silence. Their campsite sat beside a rusted ranger lookout tower, abandoned since the late 1980s after a lightning strike burned most of the upper level. The forest was dense, tall red pines blocking the sky, the air filled with a faint resin scent. At sunset, they sat around the fire, joking about the Whistler, an old local legend about a ranger who vanished and whose ghost still whistled through the woods at night. Around midnight, Lena woke to a faint whistling tune drifting between the trees, slow, rhythmic and human. "Kyle, that you?" she whispered. No answer. The fire was out. The tent zipper was open, and just beyond the dying embers, footprints led into the woods, bare footprints. The first sign of him. By morning, Kyle was back, groggy, pale. He said he'd gone to pee and lost track of where he was. But Lena noticed something odd. Pine needles stuck in his hair, his clothes damp as if he'd been lying on wet soil. They decided to explore the old ranger tower before heading home. The stairs groaned under their boots. Inside, they found carvings scratched into the walls. "He whistles when you sleep." Lena brushed it off as graffiti, but David seemed uneasy. That night, the whistling returned. Louder this time, it circled the campsite. David shined his flashlight into the trees and caught a glimpse of someone tall, wearing a ranger's hat, standing completely still between the trunks. When he blinked, the figure was gone. But in the silence that followed, Kyle began softly whistling the same tune, eyes closed, expression blank. The journal. The next morning, Lena found an old leather journal near the tower base. Inside were shaky entries from 1988, written by Ranger William Harlow, who went missing that same year. "Something in these woods mimics my voice. It stands under the tower at night. If you hear the whistle, don't answer." As she read, David yelled her name. Kyle was gone again. His tent was slashed open, sleeping bag empty. They searched deep into the forest, the air colder than before, their breaths fogging in the midday light. Near a hollow pine tree, they found Kyle's shoe, placed neatly beside a patch of disturbed soil. Then came the sound again, the whistle close and sharp, echoing from inside the hollow tree. David aimed his flashlight, and the light caught an eye staring back at him. Not Kyle's. Alone in the pines. David and Lena ran until they reached the tower again. They decided to wait until sunrise and leave. But the forest didn't stay quiet. Branches creaked. Something moved below, circling the tower base. David whispered, "He's down there." Lena peered through the broken floorboards and froze. A man in a park ranger uniform stood in the clearing. Neck twisted at an unnatural angle, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He was whistling. Slowly, the whistle shifted into Kyle's voice, calling her name. "Lena, it's me." David grabbed his rifle, but when he fired, the bullet passed through. The figure dissolved like mist, leaving only the echo of the whistle drifting upward. Then the tower began to shake. Boards cracked. Nails screeched loose. Something unseen was climbing. The climb, the only escape, was up. They climbed toward the tower's burnt upper platform, the steps swaying. Below them, heavy boots clomped against the wood. Steady, deliberate. Lena reached the top first. David followed, gasping. Then the sound stopped. When David looked down, a pale hand gripped the railing beneath him, sinewy, dripping sap like blood. A face rose from the dark, hollow eyes, teeth grinning wide, skin gray-green like bark. David kicked, shouting, "Go, go!" He slipped, fell. The forest swallowed the sound of his body hitting the ground. Lena screamed his name, but all she heard in reply was whistling, now coming from below and from the treetops around her, every direction, a chorus. There's the whistle that never ends. Rescuers found Lena 3 days later, wandering barefoot on a service road miles from camp. Her mind fractured. She kept whispering, He's still in the trees. Her friends' bodies were never found. Only David's broken flashlight at the tower base and Kyle's camp mug half buried near the hollow pine. Rangers closed off Red Pine Forest soon after. Locals say they still hear faint whistling drifting through the valley at night. Sometimes it mimics laughter, sometimes crying, and sometimes it stops suddenly, as if whoever's listening has just been found. Last year, a new ranger reopened the trailhead for hikers. On the second day of patrol, he radioed the base, panicked. "There's someone in the trees, wearing my uniform." Then came the sound of a whistle, long and low, before the line went dead.